I was actually remarking to someone the other day, I went to grad school for screenwriting, and people would ask me, why didn't you study directing? And I was like, because the actual making of a movie is like building a house. It's like as much hard labor as it is creative.
It is. It's Stanley Kubrick supposedly said, having been a still photographer for Time magazine, I believe, before he became a director, that it's the same thing. It's problem solving. Filmmaking is problem solving. Anyone who doesn't want to be a director, I get it. You need a certain kind of, I say that with a mix of pride and shame. That you actually need a bit of a masochistic personality disorder or something to actually do this thing.
That is Norwegian filmmaker Joachim Trier, whose Acclaimed movies, sure enough, show a lot of sympathy for characters who are pretty rough on themselves. His debut, Reprise, was about two young friends in Oslo, one who beats himself up for not becoming a famous author, and the other who has a breakdown when he does. Trier's follow-up, Oslo August 31st, depicts a day in the life of a self-sabotaging addict. And his latest film is about a woman named Julie trying and failing to find the perfect relationship. Its title is a phrase Norwegians apparently use a lot when describing themselves: the worst person in the world. I'm Rico Gagliano, and welcome back to the MUBI Podcast. MUBI is the best place to stream beautiful hand-picked cinema. On this show, we tell you great stories about beautiful cinema. Season 2 of the show is coming in June. Today, though, another special episode to tide you over. You are going to hear my interview with Joachim Trier about Worst Person in the World. Like all his movies, it deals with the crazy demands people make of themselves and each other, but it's also funny, achingly romantic, and shot in a kind of magical light that's going to make you want to move to Oslo. Last week, just before the Academy Awards, and just as the movie opened in UK cinemas, where it is playing right now, Trier told me about its themes, its Oscar-nominated screenplay, his star, Renate Reinsve, who won Best Actress at Cannes for this role, and about the movie theaters, where he fell in love with breakdancing, Godard, and giant robots. Oh, and heads up, this episode contains spoilers. Thank you for joining me, Joachim Trier.
Thanks for having me.
I read an interview with you about this movie, and you talked about wanting to make a realistic movie about the tribulations of modern love and the difficulties of different generations in kind of navigating love and sex. But I haven't heard you say why. Why did that subject fascinate you? Why take it on?
I think it's interesting how films propose one reality and then we live another. And sometimes they're quite separate. It can be quite joyful to go to the movies and watch something that's far removed from the boring everyday life one has, you know. But I actually am very curious to explore what I think I see around me or what I have experienced myself. Not necessarily autobiographical, oh, it was exactly this event or something, but thematically or like feeling, oh, that's that feeling of Jesus, I'm at this age and love is still so difficult. Or why does it seem like everyone else is figuring out their love life and I find it hard? Or, you know, I've been through those phases. I've certainly in the past had moments where I felt very lost, you know, and the same with people around me. So I thought Julie was an interesting character because she's at the start of the film, really great at maneuvering the kind of lifestyle changes and changing, you know, I want to be a doctor, no, I want to be a psychologist, no, I want to be creative, I want to be a photographer. She believes that she can be a bit of a chameleon, but when it comes to getting really close to someone, she finds that really hard. And I thought that was a characteristic that many people I know have been through or are still grappling with.
Yeah, I went back and I watched Reprise again.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like a companion piece to Worst Person. It's like characters trying to decide how they fit into society or whether they even should fit into society, whether it's a sellout to fit into society or even to have, you know, like a classic monogamous relationship. Why is this a recurring theme for you?
I think that's very personal. I think it has to do with the environment and my family that I grew up in. This politicized left-wing environment where there was the rebellion against my grandparents' generation who had suffered tremendously during the Second World War in Norway. And my grandfather, having been a resistance fighter and barely survived, just really never got over that terrible trauma of the war. And I think that seriousness was countered in my parents' generation with a sense of wanting to be free in the 60s and 70s and wanting to not abide to the rules of the grown-ups, and trying to find a better, freer way of living life. I myself got into punk, and I was a skateboarder, and in Norway, skateboarding was banned. It was illegal when I started doing it. So the cops would be chasing us, like in the late 80s. And we were like, authority figures are wrong. Skateboarding is fun. And, all that stuff became a part of how I also perceived creativity and identity. So I think in Reprise, those guys are wanting to write novels and books, and they are feeling that if they just abide to the rules of the adults, they won't have anything to bring to their creativity or to their art. That being an artist is a totality. That's like all you could be. I'm happy I graduated from that way of thinking, and I'm glad I have other things in my life. But I have certainly been one of those people. I remember going to film school at 23 in London, leaving everything behind and, going for it and just dreaming and wishing that I could become a filmmaker. And maybe that's good for a part of your life, but I think it's healthy to, like Julie goes through in The Worst Person in the World, to realize that maybe you need a home, a place to be safe with other people.
Yeah. And I mean, for Julie, it also seems like a big thing. I think we're left with her thinking, I'm going to figure out who I am and not how other people look at me.
That's a very important thing. I think absolutely. Which we're all struggling with. I mean, it certainly hasn't become easier in our time and age with, that picture of me on holiday on Instagram, that I looked happy, didn't I? Oh, people are responding as if I'm happy. I must be happy. Mm-hmm. But am I happy? We're all going through this.
I want to turn to your Oscar-nominated screenplay. I read a quote from your co-screenwriter, and I'm paraphrasing here, I hope I get it right, but it's something along the lines of, maybe we shouldn't begin building a screenplay based on kind of traditional narrative structure, but like we should start with stuff that cinema's really good at, like set pieces and suspense and musicality, music. Yeah. So I'm wondering, what were the kind of very cinematic building blocks that you built this movie on?
That's a great question, man. Thank you for asking that. That's something Eskil Vogt, my dear friend and co-writer for 5 films, the 5 films I've directed. He said this, and I agree absolutely. I think this is our approach. Generally, my phone is filled with notes, like the yellow notepad is just filled with silly ideas. Some of them turn out to be good, and some of them are, just something. And sometimes they're very formal. Sometimes they are a moment. Sometimes they're a way someone is speaking. And then when Eskil and I sit down, we both bring our ideas into the room, and we try to feel out during that year when we make the script, sometimes more than a year, what we feel is cinematically fun to shoot for me as a director, but also what we feel could build character. So for this film, like for example, there's a set piece an idea we had early, which was someone crashes a wedding party without knowing anyone. She plays around, gets drunk. She has conversation where she pretends she's like a doctor, something else which she is not. She feels free, and then suddenly she meets someone that she likes a lot.
Hi.
Hey.
Skal ikke stille meg de vanlige spørsmålene.
Hva de vanlige spørsmålene?
Hvem jeg hva jeg driver med.
And this guy likes her as well, and they both admit very quickly that, listen, we're both in relationships. We can't be unfaithful. But then they start thinking about, what could we do, though? That's not being unfaithful according to the rules. And they start doing all kinds of strange things with each other that actually turn out to be quite intimate. They share a secret they haven't shared with anyone. They bite each other. Like, is it okay to inflict pain on someone? That's not sexual.
Oh.
They end up smelling each other's armpits. Like, they do a lot of embarrassing stuff to somehow deeply flirt. But at the end of it, they still go, we didn't cheat.
Vi var ikke utro, da.
Vi var ikke det.
Vi var ikke det.
Nei.
We weren't unfaithful.
Ha det.
Then they leave each other.
And that was like the central scene of the construction of this screenplay for you.
It was, of the early part, it set Julie's character into play, because it's a playful, funny way of approaching the serious topic of monogamy. She's being both very honest to her own emotions in the moment, yet she's trying to do the right thing and not cheat on her boyfriend. And I think how you deal with that says a lot about who you are. So it was a good character scene to set up Julie. The moment a character or the characters come into play, we very, very quickly figure out what of those strange ideas that we have can kind of fit in and not.
So if I had to define it, your process would be kind of like a whole bunch of scenes in search of a character.
Yeah, well put.
Speaking of which, you wrote, my understanding is that you wrote this character for the actress Renate Reinsve after she had a bit part in one of your early films. And first of all, I think there are actors listening to this right now who'd like to know, what did she do in that bit part that made you go, I'm going to write a full screenplay based around this actor?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it was actually the film Oslo, August 31st, and that's 10 years ago. And we were shooting morning scenes, and to get the transitional light through a long sequence, we had to shoot, I think, 8 or 9 days with Renate on set, even though she only had this one line of dialogue. And I realized her energy on set and the fact that I could give her little things to do in the background. She wasn't the lead character, and she always came up with funny stuff. Every damn early morning at 5 a.m. she would bike around and laugh and have this incredible energy. And I was like, who is this person? I mean, I'd cast her and I thought she was good at doing this line of dialogue, but she was really fun to have on set. And I'm always rooting for the actors or the people who have like a particular style, but that I see haven't been given the kind of the shot they deserve. And she's certainly one of them. I've seen her do great work in theater for many, many years, but she never... I mean, this is also an important thing to mention, is that Renate is quite young, and beautiful looking, and she got a lot of smaller characters in TV show as perhaps the antagonistic new girlfriend of the ex-boyfriend of the lead or something. Like she would get these parts where she was funny and she made the most of it, but maybe she was more cast as a type.
What about her did you embed in the character?
I know her quite well now, and I think there is a mixture of getting out of emotional tricky spots by humor and levity and charm that she does well, and she is all that. She's very funny. But she also has a sensitivity and a melancholia to her. Quite a serious perspective on life, and I think like that mixture, I find that very endearing. I
want to go to the other main character in this, who to me is Axel.
Yeah.
The first boyfriend that she has in the film. There's a moment at the end that when speaking to people about this movie, a lot of them are very affected by. And I'll preface this by saying I am close to your age, and so is Axel. And the people that I'm talking to tend to be close in their age to Axel. And he has this soliloquy almost where he's sort of reflecting on his life and the fact that he has always been kind of a collector of objects, and how he's nostalgic for a time when objects had a lot of power, as opposed to now when it seems like, everything's kind of ephemeral and maybe digital. And I couldn't help but pop psychologize.
Yeah.
Is that you speaking? A former punk, a guy who I know was a DJ at times and like a record collector. Is that you?
Yeah, I guess it's both Eskil and me, and also trying to deal with something we're a bit ambivalent about in ourselves, in our own life. It is certainly me who grew up believing that my cultural references and the bands that I liked or didn't like defined who I was as a person. That's a very generational experience, I think. I have a lot of friends at different ages and young friends who are not so concerned with having like a life choice of whether you love The Who or Rolling Stones best or something. I mean, like that time has passed a bit, it seems, and maybe for the better. And that's where, we can't cling to nostalgia, and nostalgia is dangerous. Nostalgia is also a place where it's like a comfort blanket. In the past, you don't die because you lived. And the future is scary, and mortality and time plays into it in violent and scary ways as you get older. And I think that moment in the film is about someone trying to reconcile, was all that cultural orientation, what did it amount to, And so rather than to just say that I'm the guy who thinks that vinyl and Blu-rays are by principle better than the streaming world, because I don't know. I love the fact that I can have the weirdest discoveries sitting on a bus on my iPhone that I would only be able to have in a New York record store, 15, 20 years ago. I think that's pretty awesome. At the same time, there is that every generation sees that at some point their thing has passed. And I think being in my 40s now, that's personal.
For me too. And actually, watching the character of Axel talk about his youth hanging out at record and comic book stores that have now all closed, I couldn't help but think about the probably years worth of my life I have spent in movie theaters. And of course, there's a lot of talk now that their time has passed. Next season on this show, we're going to tell the stories of some of the most important movie theaters in history, which made for a good excuse to convince Trier to indulge in a little nostalgia himself and tell me about the most important theaters in his history.
Yeah, I have a few, and they're all in Oslo, so I won't labor the point of the geography of them, but there's the biggest screen in Norway is called the Colosseum. It's a sort of a big cinema. It's like 1,000 seats or something, or more even, maybe 1,200. And I remember going to see a lot of the formative big films. Like I saw E.T. 3 times when I was 9 in that theater. I had my parents just take me back. I saw Beat Street. I think back now, like that weird that Beat Street was that big, but it was the breakdance movie, you know?
Yeah, those are two very different movies. Were they around the same time? They are both 80s movies.
Yeah, they are. And I went from being that dreamy kid that cried at the end of E.T. to being a breakdancer in that year when I was 9. This was 1983 or 1984-ish. So I mean, that was a big theater. But I also saw like the Karate Kid. I remember years later also watching a lot of action movies there, like that big cinematic thing on one hand. On the other hand, also the Oslo Cinematheque that I started frequenting when I was a young, aspiring intellectual in my late teens and watching. I was like, oh, all of 80s Godard is playing in the next 3 weeks. Well, I have to see all of that. Going every day, with my nerdy friends and like, okay, I like that one. I didn't understand anything, but it was cool. It had, it was some weird slow motion stuff with Isabelle Huppert. That's great. I love that,
It's interesting at a time when theaters were like that important, like were such a center of a young person's life. You could almost gauge your development as a person by the movie theater that you were going to. Like there's the big theater that's where you're seeing like the big mainstream things. And then when you become a punk, you're like, well, then I'm moving on to the art house.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. That's the journey. But I always kept one foot in each camp, I was asked by Film Comment magazine recently to do a guilty pleasures list. And one of the films I remember being very moved by is the, Transformers 2. When they have in the Birchwood, what's they call them, the big robot, the American truck.
I don't remember.
Yeah, he gets killed, and it's kind of beautiful and weirdly Tarkovskian when they're fighting out in those birchwoods, and so I have a weird association. I mean, I still love all kinds of movies, even though at the moment I'm really interested in character and human relatable stories in my own work. I still watch everything.
Yeah, I'm sure. I am wondering if somehow that scene. The death of a transformer somehow wormed its way, subtly into some later film you made.
Yeah, well, who knows?
Maybe so.
Exactly. No, but this is the point. I mean, I think that there are some films that are easily defined on paper and they're easy to talk about intellectually, and they're not always the films that give me the rush, of cinematic brilliancy. I think sometimes strange movies that are quite mainstream can do something with the camera and space and movement that, to me, reminds me of my primary fascination for cinema. You can see it in Tarkovsky and Kubrick, but you can also see it sometimes in a musical or in an action film, just the movement of something and feeling the rush of blood in your body, like it's physical. You're underwater with the character and you can't breathe. That seductive closeness to a cinematic experience. Yeah. It's interesting when you look at kids growing into our culture, looking at films for the first time as they're small, like they're starting to understand the codes. They're starting to understand how to read it and how effective moving images are, and they will always be. And I think when people talk about the theatrical experience dying, and yes, it's changing, but if you take kids to the movies, you see how strong it is.
Yeah.
It's like there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, I read somewhere that it's something like 80% of people in a movie theater, if you look at them while they're watching a film, their mouths are open.
Exactly.
It's like you just forget to have even any physical support in your face. You're so enthralled.
That's it.
Let me ask you, as a filmmaker who's obviously been shown in festivals around the world, I'm sure you've seen your films in theaters around the world. Is there one that you particularly like seeing your movies screened?
Yeah, I mean, I had a very special experience last year that I should share in the context of cinemas, because of the pandemic, I was not allowed to screen The Worst Person in the World for more than 5 people at a time.
Oh, wow.
So, and I like to show my films while I'm editing to a lot of people, not only filmmakers and colleagues, but also just friends of friends, people I don't quite know, and just get their response to see what they're interpreting, what they're feeling. And I wasn't allowed to show. So we had screenings like in a day we would do like 4 screenings of 5 people each, and then at the end of the day we could talk to a mass of people. But I was never in the seat with a group, which is I really missed. And then we're invited to Cannes, and I realized sitting in that fancy limousine going to the red carpet that, holy Jesus, I'm going to show the film to 2,300 people in 10 minutes, like for 10 minutes from now. I'm going to actually have that experience for the first time. And I hadn't warmed up to it. So I suddenly got very nervous and also excited, but that screening, and people are responding very well. A lot of laughter and a great applause at the end. And we were all moved, and we started crying, and again, this interview now, I'm the sobby guy, and we're only talking about like mortality and crying here, but I guess I am. And at that moment was really important. But the actors and everyone, it was really, really wonderful. So I think it's interesting because we're talking about awards, and the Oscars are coming up in a week. We don't know how it's going to be, but regardless of awards and everything, at least if you have a great sort of premiere screening at a good festival, that's really a joy. And I'm so happy that these festivals exist and create this little moment around a film, because it's fleeting, and suddenly everyone's on to the next one,
Yeah.
So it matters.
It is interesting to me, not this year, but last year. I'm usually somebody that's really on top of the Oscars. I always throw a party. Last year, obviously, I couldn't because it was COVID times and we weren't allowed to be together. And also, I hadn't been to movie theaters. And it was the first time in maybe my entire movie-going existence that I hadn't seen most of the films, even though they were more available to me online. It was the fact that they hadn't been on movie screens was almost like it kept me from seeing them. Like the theaters, you need to have the theaters there to create the moment to make you feel like, oh, this is something worth seeing.
I agree. I think the way forward for cinema, the paradox right now is that a lot of things are going to happen only on streaming platforms. But specialized cinematic experience films, whether they are art house things, as they're called, personal films, as I like to call them often, or the big blockbusters, I think those things will survive, and they'll exist out there. And it's very clear that there's a cultural discourse around those films that is prominent also because people go to the theater and have that kind of deep viewing experience. And what I like to call deep viewing is it's about being in an audience with other people and the subconscious experience of sharing the film. And then afterwards, even though sometimes I go to the movies alone, sometimes you also do it socially, and you feel kind of more obliged to go and have a drink and talk properly about it. Or it's an event in your life to go there, and what did you do last night? Oh, I went to the movies. And oh, what did you see? And so there is a system of appreciation of cinema that, whether it decreases or increases, I don't know. It might change. It might become more specialized, but it's there and it's valuable. Yeah. And I still shoot on 35. I still care about the movie theaters. And to be honest, a few years ago, I was scared. I was like trying to defend it. But now I'm like, fuck it. If people don't want to go, fine. See what happens. I dare you. Don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. I'm not so worried. It's going to be okay.
Joachim Trier. You can see The Worst Person in the World on big screens in UK cinemas right now, and it'll be on MUBI in the UK and other countries starting May 13th. Check the show notes of this episode for details of where you can watch. And that is our special episode of the MUBI Podcast this week. There are more to come leading up to June, when we'll drop our full season 2, all about movie theaters, great and small, and often both. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss it. While you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find and love us. We would love to hear your questions, comments, or what you think of Worst Person in the World once you see it. Email us at podcast@mubi.com. This episode was hosted, written, and cut by me, Rico Gagliano. Yuri Suzuki composed the theme music, and Martin Ostwick composed our poignant midpoint tune. Thanks this time to Kevin Lee and Julia Nowica. The show's executive produced by me, along with John Baranachea, F.H. Eckerell, Daniel Kasman, and Michael Taka for MUBI. Thanks for listening. Be safe. Watch movies.